my favorite tools to use for the backs of quilts. It makes the quilting look extraordinary. And there are some things though that make quilting with Minky easier, and we're going to talk about them in this short little discussion. So if that's of interest to you, we invite you along for the journey. First of all, Minky comes in a lot of different flavors. It has some thinner varieties, finer nap varieties. There's some plush Minky. There's textured Minky. There's Minky with all kinds of prints out there. You name it, you got it. So depending on your application and how the look and feel you're wanting to achieve, you're definitely going to want to take that into account. Certain types of Minky are going to be applicable to certain types of projects. I certainly would not try piecing even a simple quilt with that super plush Minky. Maybe strips, maybe long, wide strips, but I certainly wouldn't do anything intricate with that super wide Minky. The other thing about Minky, because of the way it's created, synthetic fabric here, it has stretch one way and no stretch the other way. And particularly if you can take advantage of the selvage when you're quilting and pinning it on your frame, the selvage is your friend. And if you can, put these little guys right on your leaders and run your quilt horizontally, with these being a horizontal edge on your quilt if you can, because they aren't going to stretch. And one of the problems that I've seen people have is overstretching a quilt on a quilting frame, and then whoosh, it shrinks up on them as soon as the tension is off of their clamps. So, you know, respect the Minky. It's got some beautiful options. There's some amazing possibilities out there with it. And I think that there's some fun things that you could do even with orienting your Minky in different ways that would create some really fun effects. But you have to respect the fabric for what it is. It is stretchy, so be aware of that. Some tools that might be helpful. First of all, Minky, because it tends to be a thicker fabric, I highly recommend a larger rotary cutting blade. A 60mm blade is recommended, nice and sharp. You don't want to have this Minky start to stretch on you because the blade is not sharp as you're cutting it. So sharp blade in a 60mm cutter is going to be super helpful. The other thing that might be helpful for you if you're doing any piecing work with Minky is using clips instead of using pins. That is an option. If you're using pins, you'll probably want some nice long pins. So just be thinking ahead with that. And the last thing is, when you're cutting, piecing, working with Minky, you can't help but get the Minky fuzz on you as you are quilting. It's part of the joy of quilting with Minky. So having a lint roller, if you don't have lint roller, piece of masking tape that you wrap around your hand and do a little dab now and then to gather that Minky debris is super, super helpful. So those are tools that are super helpful. So as far as preparing your quilt and getting ready to quilt with Minky, you might want to definitely think about your batting. Using a lower loft batting makes sense with Minky because the Minky itself already has a loft. Okay, so that is an option, and it has quite a lot of warmth with it. So you might want to use a lower loft batting. I would recommend a batting with your quilt just to stabilize the entire project a little bit, partially because of the stability of your quilt top, and partially because it's going to minimize the stretch and pull that the Minky is going to provide, and I just think that you'll be happier with it in the long run. Finally, when you are actually setting up to quilt with Minky, because of the different loft of batting that you might be using and the fact that you have a Minky back, you're definitely going to want to check your tension when you're quilting with Minky, and do some adjustments. The good news is Minky is actually a very forgiving type of backing, in that those stitches are going to tend to be buried. The other good news is the thread color can more closely match the top, because as the thread gets buried in the surface of the quilt in the quilting process, right here it's got quite a lot of quilting on it, and this quilting here, it does have a light blue thread. Well, you would never know that that was quilted with light blue thread because it's buried in the quilt itself. So those are some of the things that you might want to think about. Now, a customer actually pushed me to do a Minky binding on a baby quilt that she had made. It was an adorable quilt. It was a pieced quilt with Minky, so bravo for her for taking on the challenge of using stretchy fabrics to quilt with. And she did a beautiful job. But she challenged me to do a Minky binding, and I'd never tried it before. And I said, hey, I'm willing to give it a try. So here's a little bonus. It is possible. Here's how I did it, and I was super pleased with the way that it worked. I did use my long arm to help me out, but I think that it would also work with a walking foot if you were super careful. So the first thing that I did is I took the Minky binding in 2.5-inch strips, and I actually stitched the edge of that binding very, very close to the edge. So I folded it in half and then stitched the two raw edges together along the long side of the binding, the entire length of the binding, before I ever put it on the quilt. That secured it so it couldn't slip back and forth as I was putting it on. Okay, and then I actually used a bowl-shaped glide foot on my long arm to mark and record a 1/4 inch from the outside edge of the quilt using the fold technique, double folded binding technique in the corners, and was able to get a pretty nice result with that. So that tool would work. I also think that you could make that happen if you're careful with a walking foot. You may have to adjust the foot pressure on your machine in order to accommodate. Think about that. That's a lot of layers there. Do some testing of your stitch quality and making sure that it's not going to shift. Walking foot is essential for that one. So those are my top tips for quilting with Minky. I hope that these tips have been helpful for you and that you have fun with quilting with Minky. We do have 6 gorgeous new colors of Minky at the shop. So if you're looking to snuggle up with a quilt this weekend and enjoy some cuddly fabric to stitch with, quilting with Minky is a great option, and I think you will have a blast. Thanks for watching, and if we can be of help to you at Bluebird Quilt Studio, we look forward to quilting with you again.